Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming back at you again for another Film Fanatic Bonanza. Thanks, everyone. There's been a new little batch of folks that have been subscribing to the channel, and always super fun and exciting. And, as well as some folks, some newer subscribers who have been commenting on the videos I've been posting, and it's very cool. So I really appreciate the love and the support. And, it just fuels my desire to keep this whole crazy thing going. I love doing it. It's something I do. It's something I do every day. Usually I do a video every morning. Like last, occasionally there's some things that get in the way of me doing the videos, and that's usually just because I might have a couple of things going on that pull me away from doing it. But I usually try to film the video at least. Like yesterday, for instance, I had kind of a busier day, and I lost a little bit of track of time before I had a rehearsal in the morning, and then had to go to work and stuff. But I was able to I was able to record a video, and then I uploaded it today, and that was on a beloved science fiction classic, or a beloved film of mine, Logan's Run, and I love that movie to death. I was mentioning too in a previous video that as much as I love science fiction, I mean, I have plenty. I feel like I have plenty. If you're a fan of horror movies, I feel like I have plenty of horror films out on this channel, and I have quite a few science fiction movies. But I feel like I just don't have enough for some reason. It's weird. As much as I love sci-fi, I don't feel like I've done too many videos on or just on enough of coverage of those great movies. So I'm gonna, moving forward, I'm keeping that in mind, and I'm going to definitely do more sci-fi movies because that's my favorite. Sci-fi, horror, exploitation is my favorite genre or genres, and in particular when there's the blending of those two. When sci-fi and horror are blended together in kind of an exploitation kind of way, it is to me it's uh, just so awesome. I so love that whole 2 degree subgenre. My favorite exploitation movies are the slasher movies. Just amazing. I had a friend, or I should say, a person on Facebook that I know, or on who a new subscriber had just commented on. Well, everybody's a friend. Everybody's a friend who subscribes to this channel, I should say. But I had someone recently comment on the New York Ripper from Lucio Fulci, and that's just primetime example of that. That's one of my all time favorite movies. That is a go to slasher movie for me. It's one of my favorites. It's arguably my favorite Lucio Fulci movie. It's either that or, it's so hard to say. There's so many great films of his. Between that and The House by the Cemetery, which is probably my favorite one overall. But there's so many damn good movies that he directed. And so, but my favorite genre in the exploitation world is definitely the slasher genre. And right behind that, or almost a close tie, is the science fiction horror style when those things are blended together. One movie that I really really love is Creature. Fabulous, fabulous movie. Just where it blends all those elements together perfectly well in kind of the exploitation world. So today is a movie that is definitely a classic exploitation movie. It's such a bonkers, and it's such a bonkers movie. It's so crazy. It's so bizarre, and it's so utterly cheesy. And to believe and to think of the year that this movie came out is kind of astounding. When a lot of the times when I do these videos, obviously when I do these videos, like when I used to do them on Facebook, when I used to do the Facebook live videos, I would usually plan really in advance as to what I was going to do as far as a movie go, as far as what movie I was going to do. Usually I would do it a week out, at least a week out. And a lot of the times, what I would end up doing was I would, I'd pick a movie in my collection that I wanted to get to and do a video on. And then in those days leading up to it, I would watch the movie again. And then I would actually, the day of me doing the video, I would actually take notes, and I would compile these notes of things around the movie, and I would look it up online, and then just think about, jar my memory a little bit, and I would, certain things maybe around the film that I found around that film that I felt were of particular interest, or I found really fascinating, and I'd make a little list on, I'd write things out, and I make a list of what I wanted to talk about, like some key points or things I thought really were interesting and stood out. And then I'd also like do promotion before I did the video for the Facebook Live thing. So it was very planned out. Usually, as far as how I was going to do it, where I was going to do it, and I typically back then when I was doing the Facebook Live videos, I was doing, all kinds of things where I would space out the videos. I would do them on Saturdays typically, and I would only do them about, twice a month. I was always cautious around the idea of maybe overexposure, doing too many videos. But it's funny because over time I just realized that I really love doing this. It's you know, these movies mean the world to me. They're super fun, and they're an endless source of inspiration, and and also to a degree, it's like it's therapy for me. I just feel better when I do the videos. It might sound kind of funny or strange, but I feel like it's like a cathartic thing. So, and I noticed when when I went through a period where I did these videos, I would, not do them for a long period of time, or some days would go by. I kind of almost get depressed. I would almost feel like kind of withdrawn. And I noticed when I started doing them more, and obviously when I switched over from Facebook to YouTube, I found myself really feeling good. Like it was kind of like it's become a thing of like having that first cup of coffee in the morning. So, but anyway, so I always and I just felt like, well, this is a good way to start the day. So, and I think it's all been in kind of with the idea of like baby steps that I think it's helped the channel, and I think it's helped it grow quite a bit over the last 6 or 7 months that I've been doing it. I started doing these videos on this channel in August of last year, and since then I've been sticking to doing them pretty much every day. So today's show is about another, just like I said, just crazy bonkers exploitation movie, and that is Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter. This movie came out in 1966. It was directed by William Bodine. And again, it's one of those movies that it's so crazy when I think that this came out in 66. Just because of how silly and surreal and hilarious this movie is. And so cheesy, but just so wonderful. And it's, I've been in my discoveries in the world of exploitation since I've really been taking that deep dive the last couple of years. And again, it's a style I've always loved since I was a kid, but I've just decided to, proactively dive into that rabbit hole and really explore that world as thoroughly as I can. And with that, I've discovered all of these other movies that I never had seen before. And that's one of the coolest things about this whole venture, at least for me. And the other thing, too, my favorite decades, which I've always mentioned, are the 70s and 80s for films. But what I've noticed in my exploration of this whole thing is how much further back that a lot of these films were kind of coming out in the 60s and 50s even. So it's always been just really interesting. The director William Bodine was an American film director. He was Hollywood's one of Hollywood's most prolific directors at one time. He turned out just a huge number of variety of genres, which is just wild. Um, I probably have, without me really, getting specific with titles, I'm sure I have a few of his other films somewhere in my collection because of apparently how prolific he was. Um, and again, that's one of the coolest things about doing this channel and kind of taking on this whole format is all of this all of these new things that I've been fortunate enough to really discover. And it's wonderful. I love it. It's my favorite thing. So, and it's all about, kind of taking that, diving deep into that rabbit hole. So, of course, Billy the Kid versus Dracula, which came out in '66, was a film he directed. Also, wow, 1943, he directed The Ape Man. Wow, 1943. Sparrows, which came out in 1926. Wow. The Green Hornet, he also directed the original TV movie, The Green Hornet, or the television show. That's wild. That was uh, one of Bruce Lee's big breaks. Ghosts on the Loose, which came out in 1943. Little Annie Rooney, which came out in 1925. Like, this is crazy, like how far back this stuff goes. And this movie, the title itself is just completely bonkers, and it's exactly what what you get. This campy sci-fi western, infamous outlaw Jesse James takes a detour from the robbery and finds himself in the midst of horrific experiments by a descendant of Dr. Frankenstein, setting up the ultimate showdown between Frankenstein and Jesse James. And I don't have this movie on Blu-ray. I bought this. It's on this compilation, which is actually really awesome. And the rest of these movies, I haven't covered any of the movies on this compilation, but this will be eventually. I'll get to all of these movies. This was it's a cult classic Monster Fest collection. I have quite a few of these little collections, and this is a DVD format version. It would be cool to get this movie. It would be great to get Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter on Blu-ray at some point. But this is actually a pretty awesome edition. It has 4 movies on it. I got this. I've had this DVD collection for quite a few years. And I think it was last year I sat down. I had owned it. I had it in my collection for a while, and I never watched it. And it was last year I sat down and I watched the whole thing, and it's awesome. And it's a collection, it's a compilation of all of these great exploitation movies that came out. Basically, most of them came out in the '60s. But Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter is it's definitely one of the campiest movies I've ever seen. It's incredibly low budget and it's kind of terrible. But again, all of those qualities, it fits into that whole kind of cliche thing. It's so bad, it's good. So it's I love when I think about certain movies of where they have that quality and what makes them work and what doesn't make them work. And I feel like for a lot of films, it's a fine line of where those things fall in place. I see it being more of a problem really like for films that are like, quote unquote bigger Hollywood movies where and I think it's because of the serious nature of the film. I think it's because that a lot when I see films that are say of a bigger budget that do falter or that do that aren't really that great, or have good things about them, but they kind of ultimately fail. At least in my mind, as a good film. I see it because I one of the things I think about is around that is, and again, it's a real like fine line, but I think it's because of the motivation and the execution of certain films that are done that way, where something, it's obviously it has a much bigger budget. They have the luxury of taking their time to a degree, doing numerous takes. Everything has a high end quality to it, including the acting or the script. But there's this thing of where there seems to be at times, as far as with writing goes, for the screenplay, problems when those things happen. I think one of the big problems is that there's maybe too many people involved, too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too many people involved with writing the script. There's a level of where everything is so serious, and they have this air around how they're going to do the film, and that it's going to be a classic, or it's going to be a bona fide hit. And it's not, and it loses some kind of aspect around the fun aspect of the film. And it does take itself so seriously. There's no kind of going behind the veil a little bit, where they can kind of laugh at themselves a little bit. And I think with the exploitation world, you have a lot of those qualities, you have a lot of those characteristics, but the low budget nature is such a big part of it. Not having the budget that a lot of other films have, also, like I've made the analogy a lot before in the past, it has a lot of these films have that punk rock kind of quality, where it's like you turn it on the mics, you're filled with passion, you want to just put it out there and you just go for it. And there's not, and sometimes there's going to be mistakes because you're just, everything is off the cuff, and it's kind of like this guerrilla style of making music or making art. So, but a lot of the times when those things are really rough around the edges, add to the allure of it. And also, I think there's a thing of where obviously exploitation directors take themselves very, very seriously. Case in point, to a degree, Herschel Gordon Lewis, one of my favorite of all time, probably my favorite exploitation director. But at the same time, he's also kind of making fun of himself, not taking himself as serious as people might think. And he even, as example, using Herschel Gordon Lewis as an example, he doesn't even really consider himself to be an artist. But he has a certain aesthetic, he has a style, and they're just going for it. And they're just, there's like a lawlessness to it, and there's a little bit of danger to it. But it's a fine balance. And I feel like that's what makes the exploitation world, for me, significantly different. More or less at the creative core. And this film, Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter, to me is like the epitome of that. It's you have these two kind of classic stories or icons from, one being Jesse James, who was a true life figure in the western genre, but then also in reality, obviously as a literal character. And then you have the classic myth, Frankenstein, a fictional character created by Mary Shelley. So the idea of like blending them two together and putting, or even the notion of taking the Frankenstein character or characters based from Mary Shelley's book and putting them in a western, in itself is just completely ludicrous and wacky. But I think it totally works in this movie because it's so ridiculous and so entertaining. And it's great. And the other thing that I'm always blown away by is like when I said before, when I've taken this deep dive in the exploitation world and discovering that so many of these films, you know, uh, all these films I've been discovering from the 50s and the 60s, like, and this coming out in 66. It's astounding, and it's wonderful to see that. Oh wow, you can trace back this crazy, wacky lineage of the horror exploitation, you know, to decades gone by. Where you might have thought, well, okay, the slasher film or the exploitation world, your first exposure to it was, maybe in the early '80s, like it was for most people, myself included. But then you just trace it back. You trace back the lineage, and you're like, wow, like this goes back, in the '60s, 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. So it's just wild, and I love that you know gaining that perspective, or learning about those things. Being that I'm a film fanatic, but this would definitely be a movie that I want to get on Blu-ray at some point. But like I said, I'm pretty happy with this collection, and I will eventually get to these other movies on here. They're all really fantastic, but Jesse James Meets the Frankenstein's Daughter is probably one of my favorites on here. Just awesome, and yeah, it's definitely the epitome of crazy exploitation. It has obviously a little bit of a sci-fi thing. It's got the western kind of well, it is a western first and foremost. It's got the horror element, and it's super silly and campy, and it's incredibly low budget. Like the design of Frankenstein in this movie is so like ridiculous but amazing at the same time. Just an awesome movie. So please check it out if you get a chance. It's a fairly, as far as when it when it comes to exploitation movies, this movie is fairly well known. It's super, definitely a cult movie. It's super underground, but it's a pretty fairly well known movie out there in the world. I've seen things about it here and there, and I'm always surprised. And I think it's really due to the director of this film, who was so prolific at one point, William Boudin, who was like basically a big time Hollywood director at one point, but he also made these wacky exploitation movies a little bit later in his career. So I think that obviously helped build traction for this movie over the years. But anyway, so thanks again, and keep commenting on this channel and coming out and supporting this channel. And if you like this page, please subscribe to it, and we will see you next time. Peace.